At 2:43 a.m., the neighbors heard the faintest whisper. A scream? A warning? No one could tell. By the time the police arrived, everything had vanished. The evidence erased. The person responsible? Gone. They were not caught by chance. They were invisible. And yet, every action left a trace in the mind of a criminal. Tonight, we explore the secrets they tried to hide, the plans they perfected, the lies they told, and the darkness that resides within a mind capable of crossing the line that most of us would never dare to approach. The mind of a criminal is not born overnight. It's sculpted over time through fear, necessity, obsession, and sometimes pure curiosity. Tonight, you will see what no one wants to admit. You'll witness the thoughts, the planning, the hidden motives, and the secrets they carried into their final act. Some truths will shock you. Others will feel unnervingly familiar. Our story begins in a quiet suburb, the kind where mailboxes stand in perfect alignment and lawns are always green. On the surface, nothing seemed out of place. But beneath the neat facades, subtle cracks were forming in the life of one individual, whom we will call Alex. Alex grew up in a family that valued appearances above all else. A father obsessed with status, a mother who turned every argument into a lesson about propriety, and two siblings who always seemed to be a step ahead. To outsiders, it was a perfect home. But perfection can hide something far more dangerous: the absence of understanding, the lack of empathy, the quiet seeds of manipulation. From an early age, Alex showed remarkable intelligence, but it came paired with an unusual curiosity about human behavior. Why did people lie? Why did they obey? Why did some act out of kindness while others acted out of cruelty? This curiosity was more than intellectual. It was instinctual, bordering on obsession. Every gesture, every tone, every hesitation in conversation became a puzzle to be solved, a potential lever to manipulate, a tool to control. By adolescence, the pattern was clear. Alex was not only curious about people, but also about how far those people could be pushed and what they might do when pushed. The first major act of deception came at 17. A close friend had confided a secret, something private, something that could ruin them if revealed. Most teenagers might have held that confidence or shared it carelessly without thought. Not Alex. That secret became a tool, an experiment in power. Alex tested the friend subtly. Small lies, small manipulations. Would they notice? Would they panic? Could Alex control the outcome without being detected? The experiment was a success, and in that success, a dangerous thrill emerged. The thrill of control. The thrill of knowing more than anyone else, seeing the strings beneath the stage. It wasn't malice at first. It was curiosity. But curiosity, unchecked, can become obsession. And obsession can become something far darker when combined with intelligence, patience, and a complete lack of empathy. By the time Alex graduated high school, these small experiments had evolved into a deeper understanding of human vulnerability and a plan for how to exploit it in the real world. The first crime was simple, almost banal, a theft, a con. But it was meticulous, perfectly executed, and never traced back. For Alex, the thrill was not in the gain, it was in the execution, in the proof that no one could see through the facade. Neighbors and witnesses described Alex as polite, helpful, unassuming, a model citizen. And that, of course, made it all far easier. People trust those who appear normal. People overlook subtle anomalies when the surface seems pristine. But in the shadows, a pattern was forming. The crimes were escalating, not in size, but in complexity, in psychological depth, in control over the victims and witnesses. Each act taught lessons, sharpened skills, refined the understanding of fear, guilt, and trust. Soon, Alex began keeping meticulous records, not of the acts themselves, but of human behavior. How did people react under pressure? Which lies were believable? Which excuses were sufficient? Each observation, each experiment was stored in the mind as data ready to be recalled, applied, and perfected in later acts that would become untraceable. If you're captivated by the twisted mind of a criminal, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. In the next segment, we'll dive deeper into the acts that escalated Alex from small manipulations to crimes that would shock even the most hardened investigators. You won't want to miss a single detail, because every move, every secret, every thought leads to a revelation that changes everything. By the age of 25, Alex's understanding of human behavior had become almost clinical. Friends, family, colleagues all viewed Alex as rational, controlled, normal. Yet beneath that surface was a mind capable of carefully orchestrating chaos, of controlling narratives, of hiding evidence in plain sight, and of leaving victims questioning reality itself. The secrets Alex carried were not only acts of crime, they were reflections of the mind itself, of the thought process that could plan, anticipate, and execute without remorse. And as you'll see in the next part, it was this mind, this obsession with control and secrecy, that led to acts that no one could have anticipated, and no one could easily unravel. Next, we will explore the first major turning point, the crime that would change everything, the evidence that almost betrayed Alex, and the first time that the secrets nearly came to light. Alex's first crime had gone unnoticed, but the thrill it brought was intoxicating, and soon the desire for a greater challenge became impossible to ignore. The small manipulations, the minor thefts, had been practice training for what would come next. It began on a quiet Tuesday evening. The neighborhood was settling into its usual routine, porch lights flicking on, televisions humming behind closed doors, the faint scent of dinner drifting from kitchens. And in one particular house, a modest two-story on the corner of Elm Street, Alex saw an opportunity that no one else would notice. Inside the house lived the Miller family, parents who were always busy with work, two children with headphones glued to their ears, and a dog that rarely barked. Alex had observed them for weeks, their habits, their schedules, even the times the dog would go outside. Every movement was mapped, every routine memorized, every weakness cataloged. By 8:30 p.m., the opportunity presented itself. A moment of carelessness, a window left slightly open. Alex didn't force entry violently. There was no breaking, no shouting, no risk. The house itself, the routine of the family, allowed access. In that quiet, calculated moment, Alex stepped inside and became invisible. Inside, Alex moved like a shadow, taking only what would leave no immediate trace. But this act wasn't about the stolen item. It was about testing limits, about confirming the theory that control could be achieved without detection. After carefully leaving the house as silently as entry had occurred, Alex returned home. The items taken were inconsequential: a laptop, a few personal documents, but the knowledge gained was priceless. Observation, patience, precision, and above all, the intoxicating realization that the mind could dominate reality without leaving a mark. But the real thrill wasn't in the objects themselves. It was in the understanding of influence, the knowledge that people's perception of safety could be altered without their awareness. Alex began leaving subtle clues: a misplaced book, a slightly open drawer, the faint scent of perfume not belonging to anyone in the house. Nothing that would trigger immediate suspicion, but enough to create unease, a feeling that something was off. The family, unaware of the invisible observer, began to feel tension creeping into their home. Minor arguments erupted, tempers flared over trivial matters, and anxiety settled into their daily routines. And all the while, Alex watched from afar, documenting reactions, analyzing behaviors, predicting next moves. This was no longer theft. This was psychological experimentation. The family's minds were as much the target as the objects in their home. Every reaction was recorded, every lie or excuse noted. Every human flaw became a tool, and every decision a lesson. This pattern repeated itself over weeks. Minor intrusions, subtle manipulations, testing how far a person could be pushed without realizing it. And with each success, Alex's confidence grew. The mind, Alex realized, was the ultimate playground. Control could be achieved silently, invisibly, and the consequences, should detection occur, could be mitigated by charm, plausibility, or denial. But even the most meticulous plan has cracks. The first signs of suspicion emerged in unexpected ways. A neighbor noticed a shadow where it shouldn't have been. A child remembered a sound that didn't fit their usual schedule. The dog, once indifferent, began to bark at odd hours. Alex observed these subtle signs carefully, understanding that fear, uncertainty, and doubt could be as powerful as physical evidence. A shadow in the night could unravel months of planning if mismanaged. And so, adjustments were made. New routes, new timings, new distractions. Every potential witness, every anomaly, every risk factor was cataloged and neutralized psychologically before it could become physical evidence. What made Alex different from ordinary criminals was the focus on perception rather than action. It wasn't enough to commit a crime. Alex had to manipulate the world's reaction to the crime without anyone realizing it. The crime itself was merely a statement, a rehearsal, a study in the power of the human mind under subtle control. Inevitably, the first close call occurred. The Miller family's eldest child, a teenager with an instinctive curiosity, began noticing patterns. Doors that were always closed, items slightly out of place, footsteps that seemed to vanish. One evening, the child confronted the parents. "Something's wrong. I feel like someone is watching us." The parents, anxious but skeptical, dismissed the concern. But Alex, ever observant, noted the child's realization. It was a variable that required recalibration. Adjustments were made. Attention was diverted, fears were redirected, and the child's suspicions were pacified, not through force, but through careful observation and calculated reassurance. The lesson was clear. Sometimes the mind itself was the greatest threat, and sometimes the mind was the greatest tool. If you're captivated by the meticulous mind of a criminal, make sure to subscribe to Criminal Diaries and turn on notifications. In the next segment, we'll uncover how Alex escalated from subtle psychological manipulation to actions that would shock even experienced investigators. You won't want to miss a single detail, because every choice, every secret, every thought leads to a revelation that changes everything, and nothing is ever what it seems. After weeks of subtle testing and minor acts of control, Alex realized that small manipulations were no longer enough. The desire for ultimate understanding, complete mastery over perception and behavior, drove the next steps. Preparation began in earnest. Detailed maps of routines, psychological profiles of each potential target, schedules, vulnerabilities, and contingencies. Every possibility was accounted for. Every human reaction anticipated. It was no longer about theft or about thrill. It was about exercising the mind's ultimate power, the ability to manipulate, deceive, and influence human behavior to an extraordinary degree without ever being caught. And as Part 3 will reveal, this escalation would set the stage for acts of audacity, cunning, and unpredictability, where the line between observation and obsession becomes almost invisible, and the secrets a criminal hides are closer to home than anyone could imagine. By now, Alex had mastered the art of invisibility, not just in the physical sense, but in the psychological. People didn't notice the subtle changes, the minor anomalies, the small but deliberate disruptions to their daily lives. And yet, inside Alex's mind, every detail was logged, analyzed, and cataloged. The thrill of control had evolved into something far more dangerous. obsession. It was no longer enough to watch from a distance. The stakes had grown. The mind craved more than experiments. It demanded challenges worthy of its intelligence, puzzles complex enough to leave traces without ever leaving proof. And so Alex chose the next target, someone who believed themselves untouchable. The target, a successful businesswoman named Evelyn, seemed perfect. Confident, meticulous, socially connected, and utterly unaware that her habits were being scrutinized. Alex spent weeks tracking her routine. When she left for work, when she returned, when the blinds were open, when the dog was walked, when the house was empty. Every motion was predictable, every habit exploitable. But unlike previous minor manipulations, this time, Alex aimed to test not just control, but perception. To see if a human could be made to question reality itself without ever touching them directly. It was the ultimate psychological experiment and the first act in a series that would escalate far beyond imagination. Alex began leaving tiny, almost imperceptible signs, a note that seemed misplaced, an object slightly out of alignment, the faint scent of perfume that didn't belong to anyone in the house. Each act was designed to sow uncertainty. Evelyn began noticing small inconsistencies, keys not where they should be, lights flickering at odd hours, the sound of footsteps when the house was empty. Fear, subtle and creeping, began to take root. She told herself she was imagining it, perhaps tired, perhaps stressed. But Alex knew better. Every doubt planted in her mind was like a seed taking root, and with each passing day, it grew stronger. Meanwhile, Alex observed from afar, recording reactions meticulously. Every action, every internal conflict, every conversation Evelyn had about the strange occurrences was logged, analyzed, and stored for future use. Each subtle act of manipulation reinforced a pattern. The mind could be influenced without physical contact, without confrontation, and without leaving tangible evidence. The psychological tension wasn't just a game. It was a performance. Alex had learned that control over perception could be as intoxicating as control over reality. And for Evelyn, the perfect storm was about to begin. Days turned into weeks, and Evelyn's unease escalated. She began questioning her own memory. Did I leave the window open? She asked herself repeatedly. Did I misplace my keys again? Friends and colleagues noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. A furrowed brow, moments of distraction, abrupt pauses mid-conversation. Alex documented each behavioral change, each crack in the psyche, each hint of vulnerability. In this stage, the criminal mind thrives. The victim is aware something is wrong, yet cannot identify it. Every reaction can be predicted. Every fear can be exploited. Every emotion can be observed. And from the outside, it looks like a series of ordinary, almost trivial events. But inside, the chaos is real, controlled, and deliberate. Alex did not make mistakes. Each act of manipulation was subtle, layered, and carefully timed. Each shadow, each sound, each anomaly was deliberate. And the brilliance or horror of it was that nobody noticed. Evelyn's family dismissed her concerns. Neighbors assumed she was stressed. But Alex knew. Control had been established. Fear, doubt, and uncertainty had taken hold without a single trace being left behind. The next stage was more daring. Alex began integrating deception into Evelyn's digital world. Emails slightly altered, messages that seemed normal but subtly misleading, social media posts that appeared benign but caused micro-conflicts with friends. Each small digital act added to the psychological strain. Evelyn's reality began to shift. She doubted her own senses. Was the note she found real? Did she misplace the object herself? Or had someone been in her house? Every decision she made was now influenced by unseen manipulation. Alex's mind, calm and calculating, controlled her perception with perfect precision. And yet, this was still only the beginning. The experiments were designed to escalate, to test boundaries, to see how far the mind could bend before breaking. Alex's goal was not discovery, not revenge, not gain. It was the study of the human mind under influence and the thrill of total psychological control. As the tension built, Evelyn began noticing inconsistencies too obvious to ignore. A lock left open, a shadow glimpsed in the corner of her eye, the faint smell of cologne that wasn't hers. She confronted her partner, her family, even herself. Yet each explanation led only to more doubt. Alex observed silently, every reaction feeding the next layer of manipulation. It was a perfect storm of psychological warfare. And in that storm, Alex realized the ultimate lesson. The mind could be shaped, controlled, and exploited without ever touching the body. Every secret, every thought, every fear was now a tool waiting to be used at the perfect moment. And as Part 4 will reveal, the escalation would continue. The stakes would grow higher, and the line between observation, obsession, and action would blur in ways that even Alex had not fully anticipated. By now, Alex had perfected the art of manipulation. Every action, every movement, every minor disturbance was calculated, cataloged, and designed to shape perception. But the psychological experiments, as intoxicating as they were, could only go so far. The next phase required direct confrontation, not with brute force, but with subtle, strategic pressure. Evelyn, still unaware of the extent of Alex's observation, began experiencing moments that seemed impossible. Items she was certain she left in one place were elsewhere. Lights flickered at precise intervals. Sounds echoed down hallways that had been empty minutes before. Even her closest friends began to notice changes in her demeanor, anxiety, hesitation, small lapses in memory. And Alex watched, always from the shadows, understanding the delicate balance between fear and awareness. These subtle pressures were designed to fragment reality without leaving a trace. Alex's brilliance lay not in the acts themselves, but in their psychological resonance. The mind of the victim became the field of study, and every moment of doubt, every pang of anxiety, became evidence of control proof that the experiment was succeeding. Even the most careful criminal leaves a trace eventually. For Alex, the first misstep was nearly imperceptible. A small anomaly left unplanned, a miscalculated timing, a pattern too obvious. Evelyn noticed a detail that didn't fit, a clue that did not belong, and for a moment, the spell of control wavered. She confided in a close friend who suggested installing cameras and locks. It was a minor step, the one that threatened to disrupt Alex's carefully orchestrated psychological web. Every action had a consequence, and every variable had to be recalibrated. Alex observed all of this remotely, adapting strategies instantly. The misstep became part of the experiment, an opportunity to study how humans respond to perceived danger and how they attempt to reclaim control. Every fear, every adjustment, every hesitation was now an opportunity for deeper observation. The stakes were higher now. Minor disturbances were no longer enough to test the mind. Alex began planning a more direct intervention, an act that would force the victim to confront the limits of their own reality and to experience the psychological consequences of fear and doubt in real time. Maps were drawn. Schedules were noted. Every route, every potential witness, every contingency was considered. The act would be audacious, precise, and undetectable. And as always, Alex was always 2 steps ahead of anyone who might interfere. The brilliance of Alex's mind lay not in the crime itself, but in the choreography. Timing, perception, anticipation, and the careful calibration of human emotion. It wasn't about breaking the law, it was about testing the very nature of human response to fear, uncertainty, and manipulation. And in this moment, Alex's obsession with control reached its highest intensity yet. Evelyn began to show signs that the psychological pressure was working. She double-checked locks, checked doors repeatedly, and questioned her own memory. Her friends noticed her anxious glances, her hesitation in conversations, the small mistakes that would never have occurred before. Every reaction fed Alex's study. Every misstep became part of the data. And while no physical evidence existed, the emotional and mental manipulation was leaving a mark far deeper than any burglary or theft could achieve. The mind, Alex knew, is fragile, and under sustained observation and subtle interference, it bends. Not easily, not immediately, but inexorably. Fear, uncertainty, doubt. These are tools that require no weapons, no witnesses, and no direct confrontation. And Alex wielded them with surgical precision. But control is never absolute. One evening, Evelyn returned home early, unexpectedly. A small device Alex had left, designed to trigger a subtle shift in perception, was discovered. Panic flared for a moment, but Alex had already anticipated such a possibility. A rapid adjustment was made. The evidence was neutralized before it could be reported. Evelyn dismissed the anomaly as her own error, the device as a faulty household tool, and the fear subsided. Temporarily. But in that fleeting moment, Alex realized something critical. The more intricate the manipulation, the greater the risk. Every step toward perfection was also a step toward exposure. And yet, the thrill of control was too powerful to abandon. If the intricate psychology of a criminal captivates you, make sure you're subscribed to Criminal Diaries and turn on notifications. In the next segment, we'll explore how Alex's experiments escalated even further, how calculated manipulation intersected with opportunity, and how the line between observation and action began to blur. You'll see the mind of a criminal in its purest form, where every secret, every choice, and every hidden action matters. And nothing is as it seems. By the end of this chapter, Alex had achieved mastery over perception, but the desire for ultimate control remained. The experiments with Evelyn had proven that the mind could be influenced silently, invisibly, and effectively. Yet every shadow, every reaction, every variable hinted at a new challenge. Because in the world of manipulation, the smallest mistake can unravel months of planning. And in the next part, we will witness how Alex's mind pushed boundaries even further, leading to acts that would leave investigators puzzled and victims questioning everything they believed. By now, Alex had spent months studying Evelyn's life, her routines, her habits, her fears, her reactions. What had begun as curiosity had evolved into something far more dangerous: obsession. The human mind, Alex believed, was the ultimate puzzle. And Evelyn had become the final piece of that puzzle. Every experiment so far had proven one thing: people trust their own perceptions until those perceptions begin to betray them. And when that happens, fear begins to rewrite reality. For weeks, Evelyn had been living in that space between certainty and doubt. She double-checked every lock. She kept lights on longer than usual. She woke up at night to check doors. Her friends thought she was stressed. Her co-workers believed she was overwhelmed. But Evelyn knew something was wrong. And Alex knew she knew. That was the moment the experiment changed. Because once a victim realizes something is wrong, the psychological game enters its most dangerous phase. It happened on a rainy Thursday evening. The kind of night where the streets were quiet and most people stayed inside. Evelyn arrived home later than usual. Her car headlights cut through the darkness as she pulled into the driveway. But something felt different. Something felt wrong. The front porch light was already on. She was sure she had turned it off that morning. For most people, that would seem like nothing, the narrator says softly. But when you've been living with doubt for weeks, small things become terrifying. Evelyn walked slowly toward the door. Her heart began to race. She unlocked it carefully and stepped inside. The house was silent, too silent. She checked the living room. Nothing. The kitchen. Nothing. Then she noticed something on the dining table. A single piece of paper. It hadn't been there before. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked it up. On the paper were only 3 words. "You're noticing now." For the first time since the experiment began, Alex had crossed a new line. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. She called a friend, then another. Finally, she contacted the police. But when officers arrived, they found nothing. No forced entry. No fingerprints. No signs of anyone inside the house. To them, it looked like stress, anxiety, possibly paranoia. And that was exactly what Alex had predicted. Because the most powerful manipulation isn't physical. It's psychological. When someone begins questioning their own sanity, the truth becomes almost impossible to prove. Still, something had changed. Evelyn no longer dismissed the possibility that someone was watching her. And Alex knew the experiment had reached its turning point. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. Evelyn hired a private investigator. His name was Daniel Harper, former detective, known for solving strange cases others couldn't explain. When Harper arrived at the house, he listened quietly as Evelyn explained everything. The misplaced objects, the flickering lights, the strange sounds, and finally, the note. Harper examined the house carefully. He checked windows, doors, electrical wiring, security systems, and at first, everything looked normal. But Harper had spent 20 years studying criminals, and he knew something many people didn't. Criminals don't just leave physical clues, the narrator explains. They leave patterns, patterns of behavior, patterns of timing, patterns of opportunity, and slowly, Harper began to notice something. Small disturbances, tiny inconsistencies, the kind only someone extremely careful would create. Someone who wanted to be invisible. Someone who believed they were smarter than everyone else. Someone like Alex. For the first time since the experiments began, Alex felt something unfamiliar. Risk. Harper's investigation wasn't emotional like Evelyn's. It was logical, methodical, calculated. He began mapping Evelyn's schedule, comparing disturbances, analyzing timing. Then something clicked. The events were not random. They followed a pattern. Someone had been studying Evelyn for months. And if that was true, then whoever was behind it had made one mistake. They had stayed too long. Even the most brilliant criminal mind eventually slips, the narrator says quietly. Not because they are careless, but because obsession clouds judgment. Alex realized the situation was changing. The experiment was no longer completely controlled. There was now an observer studying the observer, and that changed everything. Instead of stopping, Alex did something unexpected. The experiment continued, but now it had a new subject, Daniel Harper. Alex began watching the investigator the same way Evelyn had been watched, studying routines, predicting movements, anticipating decisions. The game had evolved. Now it was no longer just about manipulating fear. It was about testing intelligence. 2 minds, 2 observers, both trying to understand the other, and neither willing to stop. One evening, Harper returned to Evelyn's house with new security cameras. He placed them carefully around the property. Doors, windows, hallways, but Alex noticed something strange. One camera was positioned differently. It was pointed not at the house, but toward the street. Harper wasn't just protecting Evelyn anymore. He was waiting for the observer, waiting for the person who thought they were invisible. The experiment had become a trap. For the first time since everything began, Alex hesitated. Up until this moment, Alex had believed one thing: that control was absolute, that the human mind could be manipulated perfectly. But now there was a variable Alex hadn't planned for. Someone who understood criminal thinking. Someone who knew how obsession works. Someone who knew criminals always returned to the scene of their experiment. And Harper was betting on that. The psychological hunter had become the hunted. For months, Alex had studied the human mind like a puzzle. But now, someone else was studying Alex. The streets grew quiet again. The house remained still. The cameras waited. And somewhere in the darkness, A criminal mind was deciding what to do next. Because the greatest secret criminals try to hide isn't the crime itself. It's the moment they realize they are no longer in control. And in the final chapter of this story, everything will be revealed. The neighborhood was quiet again. Porch lights glowed softly across the street, casting long, gentle shadows. A slow wind moved through the trees, making the leaves whisper. And inside Evelyn's home, new security cameras blinked silently in the darkness, their tiny red lights like watchful eyes. Across the street, Daniel Harper sat in his car, his gaze fixed on a small monitor connected to the camera feed. He'd been there for hours, waiting. Because if his theory was correct, the person responsible for everything would return. Criminals like this rarely just disappear. They don't simply walk away from their experiments. They come back to observe the results, to watch the fear they created. And Harper was counting on it. Just after midnight, something moved. A shadow crossed the edge of a streetlight, small, careful, almost invisible. Harper leaned closer to the monitor. Someone was standing at the far end of the sidewalk, watching the house. Not approaching, not moving, just observing. It was exactly the behavior Harper expected. The person responsible wasn't impulsive. They were calculating, patient, and methodical. And they were confident they couldn't be seen. But tonight, they were. Across the street, Alex watched the house carefully. Everything had changed since Harper arrived. The experiment had shifted. For the first time in months, Alex felt a flicker of uncertainty. Harper wasn't reacting emotionally like Evelyn. He was thinking, analyzing, predicting, and that made him dangerous. But Alex had one advantage: understanding. Because the greatest weapon of a criminal mind is not strength, it's anticipation. Alex knew Harper was waiting. But Alex also knew something else. Harper didn't know who he was looking for. And that meant the game was still balanced. Inside the car, Harper studied the figure on the monitor. He didn't rush. He didn't call for backup. He simply watched. Something about the person's behavior confirmed his theory. The way they stood, the way they observed, the way they hesitated before moving. This wasn't someone planning to break in. This was someone studying the results of their work. Someone fascinated by the psychological impact. Someone who wanted to see fear up close. Harper whispered quietly to himself. "Found you." Alex began walking slowly toward the house. Not toward the front door, not toward the windows, but toward the side yard, the exact blind spot Alex had discovered weeks earlier. But something was different tonight. Harper stepped out of the car. Calm, slow, deliberate. And suddenly, Alex realized something terrifying. Harper had been waiting for this exact move. The blind spot had never been a weakness. It had been bait. Harper's voice cut through the quiet night. "Alex." The name stopped everything. Alex froze, slowly turning. For the first time since the experiment began, someone knew. Harper stepped closer. "You're not as invisible as you thought." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alex smiled slightly. "Interesting theory." Harper shook his head. "It's not a theory anymore." Harper had pieced it together days earlier. The pattern of disturbances, the timing of events, the psychological manipulation, it wasn't random. It was deliberate observation. And criminals who study behavior usually share one trait. They stay close to their experiment. Alex had been in the neighborhood longer than anyone realized, watching, recording, studying. Harper had checked records. Alex's apartment, Alex's job, Alex's movements. Everything matched the timeline. The invisible observer had been hiding in plain sight. Alex looked at the house, then back at Harper. "You know what fascinates me?" Alex said calmly. "People think criminals act out of anger or desperation." Harper didn't respond. "They don't understand the real reason," Alex continued. "It's curiosity." A long pause filled the quiet street. "The mind is predictable," Alex said. "Fear, doubt, uncertainty. Push the right buttons and people unravel. Harper finally spoke. And eventually, so do criminals. For the first time since everything began, Alex had no move left. No distraction, no manipulation, no control. Because the one thing Alex had never truly studied was what happens when someone understands the criminal mind just as well. Harper stepped forward. Game's over. Sirens appeared moments later, their red and blue lights washing over the quiet street. Neighbors peeked through curtains as the illusion of safety shattered. And the experiment that had lasted for months was finally finished. Evelyn never fully understood everything that had happened. Harper explained only part of the truth, that someone had been studying her routines, manipulating her environment, testing her psychological reactions. But the deeper truth remained unsettling. Someone had treated her life like a laboratory. And for months, no one had noticed. The mind of a criminal is not always violent. Sometimes it is patient, curious, observant. Some criminals seek money. Some seek revenge. But others seek understanding. They want to know how people react to fear, how perception can be controlled, how easily reality can be manipulated. And that curiosity can become the most dangerous motive of all, because curiosity doesn't stop. It escalates. Until someone finally stops it. The quiet suburban street eventually returned to normal. Lights went out, neighbors went back to sleep, and life continued. But one truth remained. The most dangerous criminals are not always the loudest ones. They are the quiet observers, the ones who watch from a distance, the ones who study human behavior, the ones who understand the mind. Because once someone learns how to control perception, they can hide almost anything. The story you just heard reveals something chilling about the human mind. Sometimes, the greatest weapon a criminal has isn't force, it's understanding. And it raises an unsettling question. How many people around us are simply observers? Watching, learning, waiting. Do you think someone like Alex could exist in real life? Or do you believe the human mind would reveal the truth eventually? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoy deep true crime storytelling like this, make sure to subscribe to Criminal Diaries and turn on notifications so you never miss the next case. Because here on this channel, we explore the stories behind the crimes, the psychology behind the decisions, and the secrets criminals tried to hide. Thanks for watching.